Well, we began on a historical note, and I'd like to end on a historical note. Um, Dictatorships, with good reason, are often very concerned about their legitimacy and their historical legacy. Um, how has the Mubarak regime uh, tried to shape the telling of Egyptian history during the 20th century? And how will the telling of that history change now that it has gone?
Very difficult question. In terms of the individual, Mubarak, trying to shape a legacy, he was more of a functionary, it seems to me. Uh, he was a manager. Um, he didn't try to impose his personality. Sadat did.
Yes.
Although Egypt eventually lost the 73 war, they gained in terms of keeping troops in the Sinai, and ultimately this led to a peace agreement. But Sadat celebrated October 6th every year with all these different uniforms and parades and all that. He consciously created an image of himself as the leader,
As a heroic leader.
heroic leader,
And a believing heroic leader.
and wow, and what happened when Mubarak came in, of course, was that he was not that sort of personality. Um, he managed things. He undid finally the split with the Coptic Patriarch, for example, brought him in out of house arrest, and led the Coptic Patriarch to align with him in terms of trying to cover over the splits and upheavals in Upper Egypt, particularly that broke out between the radical Islamists down there and the Copts. Um, but his major role was in giving enough people an interest in power and staying abreast of developments such as what was going Arab-Israeli, keeping the money flow coming, having enough people obligated to him that it was in their interest to have him stay.
Right.
And he's
A
the
power
one,
broker, really.
yeah, and he's the one who really built up the police, for example, who had been more or less the poor cousins until now, and made them into a major institution where they became a major despised institution. And it's hard to draw a line sometimes between what we call the Interior Ministry, the secret police, and the police. But the brutality of all of this has been quite clear. And so, intentionally or not, Mubarak's legacy is going to be this legacy of brutality and of the overweening power of the state being imposed as harshly as possible in order to stay in power, and yet suddenly caving in because of the mass protests. But in part because in Egypt, for example, as in Tunisia, where it surprised everyone how quickly it happened, you did have something of a civil society that existed.
Right.
It couldn't really express itself, but it was there, and it finally burst forth. Whereas in Libya, for example, you can't really say you have a civil society.
No.
It's been all split up and fragmented, and Gaddafi may be able to use his guys to crush the other side eventually, although where that leaves him in the international world is something to be seen. But Mubarak's legacy, I don't see as being something that will be remembered. One thing he did not do, Nasser, the Egyptian constitution said that the vice president should succeed the president. Nasser had appointed Sadat as his vice president. Sadat appointed Mubarak as his.
Yes.
Mubarak never appointed a vice
Right.
president.
Until the last minute.
Until the last minute. You see, so it was Mubarak who, for years, from 1981 onwards, evaded, almost 30 years, the Constitution, appointing someone who would logically succeed him. And then when he did, it was a crony. It was business as usual, Omar Suleiman, and that fell apart. And everyone knew that he was grooming his son Gamal for
Right.
the leadership position.
And that was, in fact, part of the trigger to this
that
crisis.
was part of the trigger. Everyone despised. Yes.
Well, Dr. Smith, thank you very much for joining us once again, and thank you for all of the insights that you shared with us. And we wish you all the best.
Quite welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.